Hello and welcome to Voxxed Thessaloniki 2022. It's been some time since the last event due to the COVID and the pandemic, but it's a good point to reach out and gain the lost time. So basically, today we will have a speech about the Blazor UI framework from Microsoft, and we get to see an alternative to JavaScript UI frameworks, such as the React and Angular. The agenda for this speech includes the following. We have a small introduction about myself and what Blazor is. We get to look on the Blazor hosting models, the server and the client ones, and the WebAssembly and what is it, WebAssembly, and how it's used in the Blazor. We'll see the main core of Blazor, which is the Blazor components. And then we'll have a look on the advantages and weaknesses of Blazor. It's not the best UI framework, it's something new, it's an alternative one. It has good strong points, but also weaknesses. And on the closing of this talk, we'll check on the future of Blazor and if there is any future on that. Let me start about myself, give you some details on myself. Who am I? Actually, I won't spend too much time on this one. I'm Angelos Makis. I'm a solution architect at Voxxed. I've been working over 18 years in the IT industry, so I have a lot of experience in the .NET platform for different projects and products for the domestic market and abroad, and for the EU, some projects I have been working on. Lately, I'm working on Blazor and .NET with my team for the backend and the front end, and we're finding Blazor quite helpful since we have this experience from the .NET platform and the C# language. So let's pass to the Blazor. What is Blazor? It's a single-page application, something that is called SPA, very similar to Angular and to React. It's an open source, cross-platform framework for building interactive client-side UI. And it has been developed by the ASP.NET team of Microsoft, and initially was released in the 2018. The name Blazor actually comes from the two words, browser and Razor, which Razor is the HTML view generation engine, and the browser is a well-known one from the browsers, Mozilla, Firefox, and so on. It is used to present some other views rather than the Razor one, and it's very helpful on that part. We will take this one later. So we said it's a cross-platform, that meaning that we can use it on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS operating systems, and it allows us to build a UI, a web UI, using the C# language and the Razor syntax instead of the JavaScript. And this is the solution, the alternative solution to the JavaScript, as we say, to the other UI frameworks, mostly in JavaScript. It also enables both backend and front-end development with the same language. So if a C# developer is used to work on the backend and making some REST APIs, now it can make a switch to the front-end and easily make a transition to the front-end and be able to write code using the C# language along with the Razor syntax. On the client side, Blazor makes use of the WebAssembly support. We'll check what is WebAssembly a bit later. And we can have the code running on the browser with not any additional plugins. Just what we need is the .NET runtime environment. Passing on to the hosting models, we'll check that we have two hosting models, server one and the client one. The server one, as you can see on the diagram, is not something completely new. It's not something new at all. The Blazor components are executed on the server side on the SPNet Core app server. And that is done through the SignalR connection. We have a secure SignalR connection to pass through the information from the server to the client. This implementation is quite fast and simply comparing to the client one. But where the Blazor shines is on the client side, actually. Here the components are executed on the browser with the help of the WebAssembly and the .NET runtime. The runtime is downloaded on the browser, and with the help is executed with the help of the WebAssembly. No plugins, as I said before, or code translations are required. It's something natively and natural. It's very similar to JavaScript. All the execution is done on a safe sandbox, very similar to JavaScript. So there is nothing to make someone feel unsafe about executing a code on the client side. As you can see on the Blazor server diagram, we have the DOM on the right side, which is the client, and then we have the SPNet Core app server, and there we execute the Blazor components and the .NET, and that is there is a SignalR connection done mostly through WebSocket, but if there is no availability on the WebSocket, it can downgrade itself and use some kind of other of connections, just at HTTP or TCP and IP and UDP. Sorry. On the client side, we can see that we have the Blazor components and the .NET runtime downloaded on the client. It's executed through the WebAssembly, and then it's passing on the information from both the DOM and vice versa to the client. So what's WebAssembly? WebAssembly is a new language that is being standard in the modern web browsers, similar to the CS, HTML, and JavaScript. Is the fourth one that has been added on the web browsers. And mostly it's called WASM. It's an abbreviation, and most of the people are referring to as WASM instead of WebAssembly. It's a low-level assembly-like language featuring a compact binary format that makes possible to run multiple languages such as C#, CNC, Java, Rust, and other languages to a near close native performance. There is a small latency, but I think in the future that will be overcome with some additional improvements. With WebAssembly, we can have a simplified high-performance application running on a web page, and it can run alongside with JavaScript. On the diagram, we can see actually an example of the .NET Razor component running on the web client. Here we can see that the DLL files along with the .NET runtime are downloaded to the client. And then the whole code is compiled into a WebAssembly bytecode, and that one is executed through the runtime, which in our case is the mono runtime. And this runtime is responsible for achieving a connection between the application and the DOM, which includes the browser APIs, HTTP responses, and requests, and such on. Let's pass now to the core of the Blazor, which is the Blazor component. And here we have an example of a component class. So a Blazor component is a self-contained portion of user interface with a processing logic that enables some kind of dynamic behavior. So we can have the UI along with some business logic of code written in C# that produces some kind of dynamic behavior. It reacts and do something. A component is the base element of the application. Every page is considered to be a component in Blazor, and that's the root component. It uses the HTML and C# code along with the Razor syntax and the Razor language for creating the UI environment. It can be nested and reused, and of course we can make nugget packages and we can share these components to other applications. In the specific example here, you can see we have a component class that is called a counter. We have one part which is the Razor syntax, and that includes the page with the name and the routing of the component, the title, and then we have some HTML code for the header and the paragraph, which includes some information for the counter and a label. And on the paragraph that we have introduced, there is a variable inside, as you can see, the @current_count variable that is being described and initialized below on the section part with the code directive. So the business logic is introduced inside the code directive, and this, as you will see, it's plain C# code. We have initialized a variable, which is the current count. We set it to 0, and then we have introduced a function that increments this variable by 1. And that is executed every time the button is pressed. On the Razor above, we introduce a button, which on the click event, it calls directly the increment count function. And that's something that is refreshed instantly from the client. No request needs to be done on the server. And the refresh is done very fast and very quickly. What we have in the Blazor environment is something that's called code-behind approach. This is an approach to help the developers to maintain the code in such a way where we divide the front UI. Is it okay? Is it fine? Okay. So what we do is we distinguish the code for the UI and the business logic with the code in two different parts. We have one class, but we separate the code for the UI and the business into another file. This is a common approach, and this needs just one thing to make it happen. We just need to name the files in the same name, and the tool that we use, let's say the Visual Studio tool that we use to render the code and to debug the code, it will understand that we're talking about the same file. And there is one partial class with the C# code and one class and one file with the Razor component. So on the left side, as you will see, we have the Razor syntax and the UI environment directly. And on the right part, we have the C# codes with the logic. In our case, is the service. We're making a dependency injection with the service inside the business logic of this component, and this what it does is it calls a service, and this service brings us some values regarding the forecast, the weather forecast, and this one is passed to the UI, and we built a table and represent these values and render these values and present it in an HTML view. Let's check on the advantages and weaknesses. Of course, Blazor is a new framework, is not very solid, not an alternative completely to JavaScript. So let's see some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages of Blazor. It's very fast on speed of development. If someone is very familiar to the .NET platform and to C#, the transition and the migration to this will be very fast. It can easily make use of already parts done for the server side. It can use them for the front very fast and easily. It can work offline in the case of the client side. This is something that we called Blazor static application. That means there is no need to communicate with the service, with the server. No need to send something, request something for the server. A very simple example on that one will be to have some kind of game like the tic-tac-toe game that will have can be downloaded and rendered on the client, and there is no need to communicate with some external services. It's written in C#, so for someone that is very familiar to the .NET is a powerful thing. There are some already, the support from the community and third-party vendors is quite big. We have a lot of companies supporting this new UI framework. So companies like Telerik, Syncfusion, and other companies are already investing on Blazor. So that's something that shows that there is a future on this UI framework. A nice feature to have is the hot reloading, which on .NET version 6 from November 2021 is also available. So it's something very attractive feature, and something that was found on JavaScript frameworks like in Angular and was asked from the community to support it. On the other hand, we have the disadvantages, the weaknesses. There is a latency since WebAssembly needs to run on the client and needs to run the compiled version of the code. There is a latency. As I said before, it's a new framework, so it's not mature enough. There are weaknesses and things to be fixed. And of course, there is a competition from the UI JavaScript frameworks that are already available and in a state that are very mature and widely used from people. That makes the transition to Blazor even harder. Closing, I would like to say about someone should choose Blazor over other alternative solutions. Is it something that will make sense for someone to invest? This is a decision that is entirely is upon someone if wants to invest the time, and he is willing to invest on things that will come up and obstacles that he's willing to overcome and learn this new framework. So the bottom line is the decision is entirely on the person that if someone is willing to invest, because as I said, there is actually something that is targeting the .NET community. So for people that are familiar with JavaScript, they might not be willing to invest on this new UI framework. They are more comfortable. They are in a comfort zone that they don't wish to change. If someone is a hardcore JavaScript developer, obviously, I don't find any point of switching to this new framework. But for someone that is a C# developer, is definitely a very, very good choice to follow. The future for Blazor looks quite bright. There is a big community that supports Blazor. And there are some links I have shared here, as you will see on the slide, that shows the roadmap for Blazor and .NET version 7. Microsoft, which is the vendor of Blazor, sure invests a lot of time and money to make Blazor a very attractive choice and solution to the UI market. So I think at this point, only time will tell if it's something that will stay alive or it will be rejected by the community. That will be from my side. If you have any questions, I would like to, yeah.
Thank you, Angelos. Questions?
Hi, Angelos. Does Blazor utilizes the Shadow DOM or not? The Shadow DOM. the other JavaScript frameworks, for example, utilizes the
Okay,
DOM in
okay.
order to update the component with real-life data. I think that maybe it does something similar, but I don't know if you said it or not.
No, but it can be alongside. So Blazor, it can coexist with JavaScript, and it can make use of libraries that exist in JavaScript. It can invoke libraries and parts of code that are existing in JavaScript. So yeah, it can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions before we move on? Angelos, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.